There's the recording.
Okay. All righty then. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If everybody would please mute themselves. It's supposed to come in muted. I don't know why that didn't work. Thank you very much. So what does it mean to be Jewish in America today? In 2020, the Pew Research Center, famous for high-quality research on a variety of social topics, updated its 2013 study on this subject with new interviews across the spectrum of American Jews. The data was released in May 2021 and is publicly available in a 242-page report. Chaplain Barry Pitegoff, board certified chaplain, is uniquely qualified to walk us through the study's highlights. Thank goodness, because I don't know about 242 pages. Chaplain Barry's initial training and career was as a statistician, market researcher, and then transformed many years of volunteer chaplaincy into professional board certified chaplaincy. Barry is a staff chaplain at Bon Secours Community Hospital in Port Jervis and a proud member of our fellowship. Barry was valedictorian of Baruch College, City University of New York, with a BBA in statistics, followed by an MBA from Adelphi, and over 20 years as vice president of tourism research for the state of Florida, all while being a volunteer chaplain. He then transformed into professional chaplaincy with a second master's degree from the universities of South and Central Florida, internships at Tampa General, Mount Sinai in New York City, and Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City. He was conferred board certified chaplain on May 8th, 2019 through NAGC, Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains, on whose board he is honored to serve. As a research professional, Barry was invited to the virtual release of this updated Pew study in 2021 and had immediate access to the full report. And Pew has graciously responded to his requests for a few additional crosstabs of the data. As a gift to our community, Chaplain Barry prepared this presentation. On a Federation note, last year, at the height of the pandemic, we asked for nominations for heroes in our midst, those people who serve their communities unselfishly, and Barry was included in that list. I am honored to introduce Chaplain Barry Pitegoff.
And I am honored so many people are here, and I'm relying on Sharon and Wendy to tell me if my picture and my voice are coming through. And thank you so much for joining, because I know I'm against, you chose Statistics 101 instead of Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, so I'm really, really pleased. Thank you. Okay, so I think that took a lot of stuff out of my bio sketch, but yeah, I sort of straddle the fence between being a data cookie monster and being a religious clergy type person. So I get it. And Pew released this study in May, and I went to their virtual presentation and I started gobbling up the data. I said, gee, I can condense this to an hour and a half and 242 pages, and we can see what's going on there. Those who have received some publicity about it since then generally have been the special interest groups. This charity, this foundation, they picked and chose what they wanted. Out of it, I tried to be as objective as I could be. I have maybe two axes to grind. One is I'm a professional chaplain, and if I'm concerned about if a patient comes into a hospital and classifies as Jewish, what might the chaplain expect of whatever faith, where the patient is coming from, or if the patient classifies as non-Jewish because of the interfaith marriage rate, interfaith relationship rate, what might they expect from the visitors in the room? And the second concern that I really have is I've been working a lot with synagogues and churches everywhere. And forget the COVID pandemic, how can you get more people to come into the buildings? How can you grow your congregation? So I looked at it from that point of view. And I forget which rabbi this is. It could be David Wolpe, it could be Richie Address, who says in their speeches, if a priest, rabbi, or minister says, that reminds me of a story, sit down another 15 minutes. So we may have something like that. What we're going to try to do now is to share the screen, and I rely on Sharon and Wendy to tell me if it works or not. And here's my screen here. I'm gonna learn how to do this. And it may take me to my other screen. What do you see on your screen?
We
Do you see the
this.
presentation?
Yep, the presentation, yep.
Okay, because one screen it says introducing Zoom apps. The other one, I actually have the slideshow. You see the slideshow says Pew's 2020 profile?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and if there's any questions, I'll let Sharon and Wendy moderate through this. So Pew Pew is famous for very good social research. And having been in the statistical and market research fields, I'm blessed to be on the distribution list for Pew and Gallup. And Pew, as I understand their research out of Washington think tank, they get mostly research in the public interest and mostly funded by lots of organizations that want the data released to the public. You don't see a lot of companies hiring them to do private research. So they had this gigantic advisory panel for the 2020 research, but it didn't include me. So the questions that I asked, I would have asked during the development of it, because I think that they missed some what I call conditional questions. If a respondent answers this way, then I'd like to know this as a follow-up. And maybe it'd be some other, but I will point that out as we go along. They did one crossed-out for me, which you'll see, which is if a respondent identified as they resonate with Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, what's the probability that their household also belongs to a synagogue, which wasn't very obvious in the initial survey there. So here's what we're going to do. Basically, you got to realize that when you cross-section America to see who's Jewish, you got to go fishing for a lot of fish to find the 2.5% to 3% that's Jewish. I mean, the country at the best, we got maybe 2.5%, 3% of the population. So you got to go fishing for a lot of them. So you wind up going through about 68,000. Here we go. Pew did a study in 2013 that was probably released around 2014. They got a lot of funding, a lot of advisory panels again to do it again in 2020 and release it in 2021. And they had to go fishing for 68,398 Americans to wind up with 4,718 who said they identified as Jewish, because we're only about 2.5%, 3% of the population. So that's how you wind up. So, and of course, there's no forced response in this country. There's no question on the Census Bureau that says, what's your religion? So you have to go with whatever people say is honest. And when you look at statistics, you're looking at reliability and validity. How well does this represent what they're trying to find out? It's better than 2013 because almost all of it had no personal interviewer. It was done online. It was done with questionnaires. And when you hear somebody speaking and reading questions to you, you can get biased towards socially acceptable responses, which is, oh yeah, we go to shul every week. But so they try to do it on the internet. They try to do it through questionnaires where people did not hear a voice at the other end. But when you get people who say they identified as Jewish, the choices they gave were, does Orthodox, Conservative, or Reform resonate with you? I shared this with one group of people who said, oh, but I grew up Reconstructionist. Yeah, that's probably even smaller. So they had to go for the three big classifications. And I'm sorry for somebody who asked me about Reconstructionist. On the same token, I don't know how accurate this would be to reflect the Orthodox population. The non-Orthodox population, I feel good about, the Reform and Conservative, because the more extreme you are, like we go to Kiryat Yoel a lot, I don't think they're getting intercepted for surveys. There's a lot of, somebody asked me about these ads for kosher telephones and kosher iPads, and I don't know how easy it was. There may be modern Orthodox. My friend who's the head chaplain in Lenox Hill is modern Orthodox. But where possible, the interest came from the non-Orthodox community, and I tried to separate the data into the Orthodox community and the non-Orthodox community. So I think those who identified as Reform or Conservative are better, more accurately represented than those who said we identify as Orthodox. Because I don't know if the Orthodox community as a whole would have responded to an overture to a survey, would have even gotten the overture to the survey. When you deal with Haredim, with the Satmar, just going down the line there. So they, in 2020, while they were doing the survey, what was going on, you have to look at the context, was the COVID pandemic and the run-up to the 2020 election. Whether it affected results or not, but you always have to look at the environment, what's going on at the same time. And it compared very well to the 2013 survey. Not a lot of major changes, better details on the interfaith marriage rate than they had in 2013. Let's see if I can get this down here. Learn how to do this. There we go. Environmental scanning, the context. These are things that I've added since it was released, and people asked me about questions, and I had more new data came out because I look at Pew all the time. They did additional studies. November 18th of this year, they issued a study on where Americans find meaning. And, the Jewish population is not in isolation, not an island. So there is some interest from that as where Americans as a whole find meaning. What's their attitude towards future childbearing, which has a lot to do with the door-to-door questions. What's the views on suffering and God's role in it? Pew did ask Americans as a whole. Remember, you may get 2.5%, 3% Jewish in there, but this is out there now too. And December 14th, 15th, this just came out from Pew, where this got some national press. The religiously unaffiliated share of the public is 6 percentage points higher than it was just 5 years ago. This is what they call the nuns, people willing to say, I don't have any religion, I'm none of the above. So as a whole, the country is going in that direction. The size of the US Jewish population, the Pew estimate is in line with other attempts. This is very interesting. The way Pew decided to report it was to find 4.2 million that were Jewish by religion and 1.5 million that were Jewish of no religion. I asked them, I looked through the data, I don't know what they mean by somebody says I'm Jewish but not by religion, but they included that. And then separately, they included 1.8 million Jewish children. And I think that was a wise idea to separate adults and children, because later on, when they did better probing this time of interfaith relationships, they asked about the propensity to bring up the children as Jewish. So because there's 1.8 million children now of Jewish, at least one Jewish parent, whether or not they wind up being educated and relating to Judaism later on is another story. So they did separate it out into adults and Jewish children. So you wind up totally with 7.5 million, maybe 2.5% of the population. When you think about what the Jewish people have contributed, what we've done, to be still under 3% is just incredible. I think it's a marvelous mitzvah for us. Several people have asked me since I started doing this, can you get to a local level? And I added this in. I found that since the 2013 survey, the Jewish Federation of New Mexico did a follow-up study to be parallel to it. And I'll show you 1 or 2 slides for it. It is available publicly. New Mexico is a whole different animal because there's Albuquerque and Santa Fe and there's almost nothing else. So it's not like doing New York or Orange County, but they tried it, so it's a place to look at it. And they have an older Jewish population than the national population. And what you can look at from the national study the Pew put out here is there's some good data on your residence as a Jew, Orthodox, conservative, reform, and probably someone in your household belongs to a congregation. Now, if you take the inverse of it, so maybe you got 55, 65%, that's not belonging to a congregation. You can take your congregation household and multiply it by 1.5 or 2, whatever. Maybe that's your untouched population. It's just a crude way of looking at it. They looked at religious identity, denomination identity, and politics. So they balanced the data based on what they interviewed. They got 73% as Jews by religious, 27% identified as Jews of no religion. I do not really know what that means. I tried to look at Jews by religion. And then the first thing I said, well, what denomination resonates with you? And there is a clear difference by age. For the younger people, they selected no particular branch at 41%, resonates with me. For the older people, 65 and over, 44% said reform resonates with me. Why the difference? I'm not sure, but there's a clear break between the youngers and the older there. They did ask one political question about identification with a party, and they did see a major split between those who responded they were Orthodox and those who responded they were not Orthodox. Those who responded Orthodox resonated strongly with the Republican Party. Those responded they were not Orthodox resonated strongly with the conservative or reform branches. Interesting. I'm not sure why or what. I'm not going to comment politically. I was on the governor's staff in Florida for over 20 years. I stay away from politics. Okay, so we have And this came from a result of my further query with Pew. About a third, 35% of US Jews say they live in a household where someone is a formal member of a synagogue. This is your untapped market. This is where I think federations are starting to do a really good job. We still keep on the mailing list for the Federation for Tampa, Clearwater, Hillsbury, Pasco, here in Orange County. And you got a lot of unaffiliated Jewish people out there. I think this is a accurate number. It's a sad number. About 35% of US Jews say they live in a household where someone's a formal member of a synagogue. Mostly of that is the Jews by religion, not Jews by no religion. And this is my personal, no, this is a commentary here by Orthodox Union. I'm not sure how to interpret these numbers. And I said earlier on before we went live here that as a chaplain dealing with patients of all faiths, I think there's a big disconnect between the words religious and observant. People say, I'm not religious. And I think they are religious if their neighbor got sick and they brought in a casserole. They're walking the ethic of whatever faith structure they had. They just may not go to church or synagogue as often as they think their religion tells them to. So I think we have to work with some nomenclature there. The percentage of American Jews who say that they're Orthodox, Conservative, Reform versus someone in their household is a synagogue member. If you say Orthodoxy resonates with you, tremendously high percentage that someone in their family belongs. If you say that Conservative resonates with you, 56% also have somebody who belongs to a congregation. If you say that Reform resonates with you, about a third say someone in their household belongs. I think Reform tends to be the default. Often if I ask patients who don't belong to a congregation, any hospitals I worked at, oh, I'm Reform. And I think that's what resonates with them if they don't belong anywhere. Go figure it out. Can you apply this again to people in your local area? People had asked me about that. So if reported resident, among those nationally reported residents with the conservative movement, 56% said someone in their household was affiliated. So very crudely, if you're a conservative, if you look at all the conservative synagogues in your greater geographic area, wherever it is, you multiply the membership by 1.78, you might get the total. And by Reform 2.70, because that's only 33%, 37% of the reform says somebody belongs. So you have a large, and that's just a crude algebra way of looking at it, but you probably have a large untapped population out there. One of the questions Pew did not ask, which I would, if I was on the advisory panel, I'd go back and look at it. But when it comes to later on, you look at the interfaith marriage rate, does that affect the degree to which you could be affiliated or not affiliated? It's interesting, the shul that we, as our primary shul now, which is out in Pennsylvania, is next to a church that we're very close with. And we found one couple that has one spouse and one spouse and the other. So we should do a joint membership rather than try to get one or the other. So it's one way of looking at that. Among those who rarely or never attend synagogue, what keeps them away? This is a Pew question. Pew reported more anecdotes than data. They looked at the verbal response of the anecdotes. And the general response was, I'm not religious, or I express my Jewishness in other ways. And this is where I come up with my own comments on what does it mean to be not religious? Maybe you think you're not religious because you're not observant and going the right days, that your faith, whatever it is, tells you to do that. I think it also has to do with, when I look at the overall study, I think the word connections is really, really powerful. And the shuls that I think get it, that I'm involved with, is as soon as we can ever get back to the city, again, Park Avenue Synagogue, major conservative synagogue in Manhattan, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, they have lots of money for their website. Look at their website. They have reduced the emphasis on the clergy and have increased the emphasis on who are the members there. It says meet our members. And it's not, I am Steve and my wife is Susan. I own the biggest accounting firm, but this is what we get out of being part of this shul. Makor Shalom, which is our conservative shul plan B back in Tampa, and I Zoom with them sometimes. They also try to emphasize everybody counts, connections, and de-emphasize, with all due respect, if you belong to a Catholic church, you're at the mercy of the archdiocese, so no matter how much you like the priest, You belong to a shul, you got the president, vice president, but it seems that connections are really important. And if you put more emphasis on those that you meet who are going to be in the same row with you compared to who's up on the bima or their equivalent, I think these two shuls have some good examples of that might help. Among those who rarely or never attend synagogue, when you see a table that looks like this, I copied it straight out of the Pew Study. When it looks like a hand-on state table, I made it myself. What was the most, and you may see the same thing a few times here. Among those who rarely or never attend synagogue, what keeps them away? These are closed-end responses, meaning that Pew gave them these choices and how many selected each one of them. I'm not religious, I'm just not interested. I express my Jewishness in other ways. Don't think I know enough to participate, it costs too much. You think the money would come up higher up in there because people will say, yeah, they're always looking for money. Aren't synagogues where I live is interesting that we had that they included the question. I don't feel welcome, I think might be a little bit higher, but they don't feel welcome may have been a reason to stay away in the first place. Again, welcome comes from connections from the people in the same pew. But what is that word? And now you're going to get this interaction of religious and spirituality. And which one, and how do you capitalize on both of those? Why attend synagogue worship regularly? The 20% that said they attend religious service at least once or twice a month, the Jewish population, I find this spiritually meaningful. This is phenomenally interesting. We have a couple of psych units in my hospital. One's an addiction detox center where I often give support groups, and I'm often talking to them about religion versus spirituality and what's the difference. And generally, spirituality is do-it-yourself religion. You don't need a textbook. You don't have to be in a congregation with other people. I go into the woods. I think about myself. And one of the benefits of religion is there are people who care about you and you care about them. And in Judaism, the idea of the minyan even reinforces that. So if you find it spiritually meaningful, you have to capitalize on the resonance of that word today of being spiritual and bring that into the congregation somehow. I know a few shows that we've been part of where during the Tefillah Midah, and there's time for silent meditation, the rabbi uses that to the advantage, and then we all gather to come back together again. We belong to one show where Rabbi Stan Garfine used this great quote there was a British novelist named George Meredith who wrote novels around the times of Charles Dickens, late 1800s. And he had nothing to do with religion, but one quote in one of his books got picked up by lots of clergy and to get the people back together again after meditation. And that quote is, he who rises, he or she or they, he who rises from prayer a better person, his prayer is answered. I just love that. I use that a lot. He who rises from prayer a better person, his prayer is answered. Or today, she, they will work also. I find this spiritually meaningful, even though this is religion, not spirituality. They feel that it was spiritually meaningful when they came out. That's why they attend shul. So you capitalize on that. I derive a sense of belonging, a connection to my ancestry and history. I like that. That's the Vador moment, continues my family traditions. And again, these are in the macro. And I think that there's a great need in the micro. As I said, I write very regularly for JewishSacredAging.com, a wonderful website. Just put my name in there, JewishSacredAging.com. And I had a column in there recently that they published that says, people are spending $30, $40 a month for Ancestry.com and going to the census data, which I used to do. But, they're not connecting with the people that in their family that don't talk to each other anymore. Or the biggest shanda is, especially in Ashkenazic Judaism, where you name your child after a relative who died recently, but you never tell the child anything about their relative. So you don't have that, that's all you know is the name. You don't have that, you're not passing along the oral tradition. I go to the cemetery in New Jersey, I see my father's mother's gravesite. My grandmother, she died about a year before I was born. I never saw a picture of her, I don't know anything about her. This is where you start on the micro level, doing the oral tradition, connect to the ancestry and the history of the people that you actually name the children after, and make that, you got to have these Vador moments. I am so thrilled. We have almost a 7-year-old granddaughter, my wife's daughter's daughter. I never had children of my own. And every Hanukkah, she gets to turn the bulb at one of the menorah in front of one of the hospitals where she was born. And I would make, and she's learning this as she grew up. I was born here. So we're making a little tradition here. I pulled this out since I did the first presentation of this, Increasing Connectedness. This is an ad from the Jewish Press, which I have a free subscription to at the hospital. I think it's mostly a New York Jewish newspaper. But this ad gets it right. Who are you inviting? Whether it's Seder or whether it's Hanukkah, who are you inviting? I think that's a good example of connectedness. Perceived commonality. This is what I call silo Judaism, and I'm the my best evaluator said Chaplain Barry was a trans-denominational Jew. When we lived in Tampa on the same street, 2 miles, 3 miles apart was a Chabad and a Reform. We belonged to both of them. But one has no idea what's going on in the other one. And I think this is our opportunity to destroy ourselves from within, the same as the Protestants are doing. So this beautiful color graph comes from Pew itself. If you feel that Orthodox Conservative Reform resonates with you, how much do you think you have in common with Orthodox Conservative Reform? And look at the way the graph comes down there. The Reform has 93% in common with other Reform, but only 50% in common with the Orthodox. Those who resonate as conservative think they have 91% in common with the other conservatives, only 68% with Reform. And probably some of this is their perception. Some of it may come from ignorance, but this is perception that, aren't we just one people? Kol Yisrael Avravim, we're all responsible for each other. Now, this is pretty powerful because when you study demographic theory and population demography, we have a common saying that says demographics explains 2/3 of everything. Like every day we get a day older, we're all going to die one day. So you got to know the tide you're fighting against. And Pew had to interview 68,000 people to find the Jews. So they asked the others a few questions so they can do a comparative table. And here you see a table that I created, this table from the data, Jewish adults versus all US adults, of which the Jewish adults are about 2.5% of that, 3% of that. Religion is very important to them. Religion is somewhat important to them. Religion is not too important to them. And religion is very important to them. Jewish adults that only resonates with half as many Jewish adults as all US adults. American Jewish population does not feel religion is very important to them. So if you're looking at the data in terms of how do I increase the percentage of people who come to the shores, they got to realize right off the bat, the American Jewish population is half as likely as the entire population to say religion is important to us. How important is religion to you? This is a little bit deeper look at the same data. But you go down to the bottom there, net means very plus somewhat, because some people are hesitant to take the top box. So you say you add somewhat and very together, you get the total importance. And for Catholics, 80% are willing to say religion is very important to me. But for net Jewish, 47%. Maybe you have to go into the back door somewhere and say, by the way, we also offer worship and prayer. But at least you get them in the hook. It's sad, and it's, you call the data as it is. It's 80% of the Catholics and 89% of the Protestants are saying that religion is very important to me, but only just under half of the Jews are saying that religion is important to me, however they see religion or interpret religion. When you see the nice blue bars, that's straight out of the Pew study, why Jews go or don't go to religious services. They go because it's spiritually meaningful, because I don't go because I'm not religious. I'm just not interested. I express my Jewishness in other ways. That's sort of a default rationalization cop-out. Well, I'm not religious. I'm just not that interested. So, I'm trying to remember the saying, but, why do you go to shul is because X goes to shul to talk to God, and I go to shul to talk to X. That's an old Jewish joke. You can add the name wherever you want. But okay, so bring them along. You may not have to be religious now, but maybe it resonates with you in a different way. As long as you are considering all the people, I think that, as I said early on, you have to understand the context, the environment in which you operate. And before there was COVID, those of us who were obsessed with what's going on we're concerned with a trifecta pandemic that's still under the surface and coming back again, which is loneliness, isolation, and despair. And Rabbi Richie Address and Cherry Hill and I go through lots of articles, lots of research on loneliness and how are we combating loneliness, and houses of worship have the opportunity if they do it. Without naming any shul in particular, I know a rabbi was telling me once about all the wonderful programs at a shul, and we say we have a young couples club, we have a not so young couples club for but older people. I said, what do you do when one of them becomes a widow? I go, I hadn't thought about that. So that's when you really need the community. You really need to feel that you're part of something. And are we really, that and interfaith are probably just as similar because one of the byproducts, this is a personal observation over the years, one of the byproducts of that's similar between divorce and widowhood is it's multiple losses. You lose a lot of people the other person brought into the relationship, whether it's divorce or widowhood, but a shul can help offset that when you really need it. Pew, November 18th, since this came out, they did a study of Americans and what do you find meaning, because I find it spiritually meaningful. This was not a study of Jews Americans, study of all Americans, which are about 3%, but we're in the context. Percentage who mentioned blank when describing what gives them meaning in life. 2021 versus 2017 from Pew. 6 percentage point change for society, places, and institutions from 8% to 14%, but a 7 percentage point decrease for occupation and career, and an 11 percentage point decrease for spouses and romantic partners. It's just astonishing, but this is, this is the context in which we're operating. This is a survey of all Americans that Pew did in November 18th, and again, very recently and in the midst of the pandemic, that your family is not giving you the resonance that it used to. If you're looking for support groups, adult ed or something, it's a place to start. Pew, November 23, very recently, they put this one out of all Americans, suffering in God's role. Again, this is dominated by the Christian Americans, but it shows you the context in which we're operating. Americans are contemplating the big theological questions. In the last year, how much, if at all, have you personally thought about big questions such as the meaning of life, whether there is any purpose to suffering, and why terrible things happen to people? 23% said a lot they've thought about, 38% said some. So you have about almost 2/3 are saying, I've been thinking about this in the midst of the pandemic. You can do an adult ed on this. You can really talk about things. This is Harold Kushner's When Bad Things Happen. Pew, November 23, suffering in God's role before I find it spiritually meaningful. Americans are more likely to be self-centered than empathic. This really, really was a pupil dilator when I read the study just a few days ago. Americans are more likely to be self-centered. Percentage of US adults who say they often feel each of the following when they see or hear news about terrible things happening to people. 71% are thankful for the good things in their own life. 62% are sadness for those who are suffering. The empathy, the gemilut chasadim, you talk about the environment in which we are and self-centeredness. Americans are more likely to say when bad things happen, boy, I'm glad that we're okay. And then maybe I'll feel sorry for somebody else. We are a system that deals in gemilut chasadim and empathy. But this is, can you feel this way and belong to a house of worship? You have to figure out how to reconcile it. Because again, this is the November 23 thing, theodicy. Theology is the study of God. Theodicy is the big question in religion, which is how can there be a good God and bad things happen? Sometimes bad things just happen, where 86% of US adults are now feeling with the Rabbi Kushner philosophy, which is sometimes bad things just happen. This includes very religious Christians, born agains, all that. Sometimes it just happens. Before us, I find the spiritually meaningful. Pew's again study why suffering exists in the world. Adults are about evenly split, 71% in the top 2 box for individuals, 69% top 2 box for society. That few US believers say the suffering in the world has shaken their faith in God, even though they think it's just more random. That's good. Okay. Let's go back to the Pew study itself. Independent synagogue membership, what is essential to being Jewish? And surprisingly, the Holocaust still comes out very high, but it's now tied with leading an ethical and moral life. And then working for justice and equality, which is more of a stalwart of the reform movement, 63%. Intellectually curious is nice. We are the people of the book, and we always have more books to read than we've already read. Family traditions, continuing, and also it's good to start new rituals, new traditions that become a family tradition. How do you express your ethnicity as a Jew? This is non-attenders who say they do not go to religious services because they express their Jewishness in other ways. And food is the nice number one there. Visiting synagogues when you go elsewhere. Why not in your own community? But at least it's a place to start. You know, that does give hints in terms of where you come up on tourism sites for destinations, on search engines that you want to go see. New York, Paris, Amsterdam, where are the synagogues? What are the historic synagogues there? Why would you want to see this as part of it? Then maybe you'll go see your own. Actually, the mezuzot on the door to our several rooms here are a replica of the shul on the Curacao, where Apollonia lived for a long time. The second oldest shul in the Western Hemisphere. Possible ways to increase attendance through attracting new members or attracting current members. These were anecdotes from the Pew Advisory Panel. This was not questionnaire itself. They asked this question for this large advisory panel they had. Some said go to non-synagogue venues, like some doing Havdalah on the beach. Nothing wrong in having a synagogue in a non-traditional venue. I mean, the model had been the synagogue stands alone, it has its own parking lot, but you could be, I mean, Makor Shalom in Tampa is in an office building. There was a shul on the 8th floor, I think, of the Water Tower place in Chicago that I davened at. So you can have a non-traditional venue. And we went to the West London Synagogue in England, and they did one night a week in a pub. Being flexible in your dues system. This was a quote from someone who was on their advisory panel who said, the kids are spending $18 on a cocktail, they can spend $18 on a class. So, you know, looking at it from a different point of view. Before we go into this section, we can pause to see if there are any major questions on the area so far. Sharon and Wendy. There was a lot of questions that came my way. Look at the data in terms of what is there in terms of anti-Semitism. And it is pretty powerful. Last week, the week before, Apollonia and I went to dinner at the Rotary Club, and the guest speaker at our table was David Hoover, the district attorney for Orange County. And I told him we had met because I had gone to the hearings for the sadness from the cemetery desecration in Florida. So he gets it with anti-Semitism. From the Pew study overall, over 9 in 10 Jews said, the survey said there was at least some anti-Semitism in America. 3/4 say there is more than there were 5 years ago. Among those who said it has increased, the most common explanation was that people who hold anti-Semitic views feel more empowered to express them. And that's not only anti-Semitism, the country's in a mood where if you don't like something or hate something, you feel more empowered to spew that out also, not only the anti-Semitism. So I think it's coming along for the ride with everything. And I think it's sad. I think it's very sad. 6 in 10 of the Jews surveyed said they had a direct personal experience with anti-Semitism in the past year. And they're slightly more likely than Muslim Americans and Black Americans to face discrimination. When you break that data down from Pew by the Jews of religion, no religion, Orthodox, conservative, reform, age, political leaning, they all see anti-Semitism as increasing. I mean, the numbers vary, but they're not statistically significantly different. Across the board, the American Jewish population is seeing anti-Semitism increasing. And this just increases it by the age break, et cetera. This is what have they seen? Pew gave them specific choices. This wasn't an open-ended response. anti-Jewish graffiti or vandalism. They made to feel uncomfortable, called offensive names, harassed online, physically threatened or attacked. And you can see the data across the way there. The Orthodox were slightly more likely to feel out of place. Conservative Reform is not as likely to be wearing visible Jewish garbs, is what the question, the way they phrase it in Pew. By age, and here, wear distinctively Jewish items, do not wear distinctively Jewish items. There is, on the whole, they did ask the questions people were concerned about anti-Semitism, and it was increasing. Connectedness with Israel was another section, another chapter of questions that Pew asked. Just under half under the age of 30 describe themselves as very somewhat emotionally attached to Israel, but 2/3, 65 and older, describe themselves. There is beginning to get an age break. Birthright has helped, but this was even surprising to me that there is a difference by age with how much Israel resonates with you. And the younger people, it's not as emotionally attached to Israel as the older people are. Maybe something to do about that. Here's the big one that everybody was asking about, and they've done some better questions in 2013, but they still could have asked a few more, and I'll show where there was there. This is the proverbial 500-pound elephant in the room, the so-called interfaith marriage rate, intermarriage rate, and how that affects child rearing. First, they looked at the married Orthodox Jews who responded to the survey, and 2% said their spouse is not Jewish. Surprised they even found 2% who said that. So therefore, we say the extremes distort the average. As we say this in statistics, if I have two students in a class to get 100, one gets 100, one gets 0, the average of 50 doesn't mean anything. If I have two students, one gets 49 and one gets 51, the average of 50 means something. So the extremes distort it, and you got to pull out the non-Orthodox from the Orthodox. All married Jews for non-Orthodox versus all married Jews. I did that wherever possible. Since 1980, this is Pew data, the intermarriage rate for non-Orthodox Jews has risen from 18% to 72%, depending upon when the last wedding occurred. And you'll see this in their data. So you cannot say that the interfaith marriage rate right now is 72%, but the way Pew asked the question, the more recent the wedding occurred where one spouse was Jewish, then there's a much higher chance that the other spouse was not Jewish. And this is the way Pew tabulated it. If you were married between 2010 and 2020, you look at the solid blue line, non-Orthodox married Jews, 72% of the survey said that it was an interfaith marriage. Before 1980, not that long ago, it was 18%, it was even. So you see how it goes up in every 10-year group. When I got back to Pew and I asked them, they said, that was a good question. I wish we would have asked it. That's what we call a conditional question. If you answer this, well, what I have liked them to ask, which was this last wedding you had, was it your first marriage, your second marriage, your third marriage? People get older, they might get widowed, they're not gonna have any more children. I've known Reform rabbis who've done interfaith weddings. They said they're not gonna have any more children. They're happy, they're in their 60s. So I would have loved for them to have asked this marriage that was interfaith, was this your first, second, third? But they did not ask that, so you have to go with what it is, and the trend is up, that's it. It's, if you were married in the last 10 years and one spouse is Jewish, a tremendously higher probability that the second one is not. And then there's all sorts of questions that you could ask for implications in terms of, are these people not belonging to a church or synagogue? Is one of them belonging to one and not the other one? I think it's, if you want to grow your congregations, you have to look at this elephant in the room and say, what are you going to do with it? And like I said, we had out in Pennsylvania, we found one couple that one side belonged to the church, one belonged to the synagogue, do a joint membership, do more programs together, try to make them both feel welcome someplace and make them feel welcome wherever you are. Pew's estimate of the current interfaith marriage rate, 1/3 of married Jews by religion have a non-Jewish spouse. So regardless of when you were married, Those, again, non-Orthodox that they interviewed, about 33% had a non-Jewish spouse. Recency of the marriage played a strong role, and they didn't ask. This comes from that follow-up study that the Jewish Federation of New Mexico did. It's a publicly available study. I found it online. We were thinking of going to Albuquerque on vacation. So when we look at the Federation there, boom, they paid for a follow-up to the 2013 study. And again, there with Albuquerque, Santa Fe, then there's not much left in the state. But this is a very nice way that this other company presented the data for them, that in New Mexico, they found 59% were married. Of those who were married, will tell us about the partner. It's another way of looking at the spouse is Jewish, spouse is not Jewish, given that you have this a conditional probability. So you can do a follow-up study. New Mexico did that. Okay, so now you find these Jewish identified respondents who say, I'm married and my spouse is not Jewish. There were no, for those who are interested, there were no questions in the study on, is your spouse identified with the same gender as you or not the same gender as you? Maybe in the future they'll get to that, but I think it's getting more and more relevant in asking those questions. Actually, to be a member of the, in order to accommodate the Reform Orthodox Conservative, to be a member of the Association of Jewish Chaplains, you have to certify on your application that whether you're partnered or married, same gender, different gender, the other person living with you is Jewish. That's how they accomplished it with everybody. So when I joined Apollonian, I signed that form. Intermarried Jewish parents are much less likely to be raising their children as Jewish. This is the responses from the study. 93% of US Jews married to a Jewish spouse report raising their children as Jewish by religion. Only 28% of US Jews married to a non-Jewish spouse report raising their children as Jewish. That doesn't mean that they're raising them as anything else. Adult Jews who are themselves the offspring of intermarriages are especially likely to intermarry. So once you have it in the family, yeah, the going down the door, it's going to happen again. High probability it's going to happen again and again. It doesn't say that they didn't ask, well, are you bringing up your children any other way? You're just not bringing them up in Jewish. And because I face this all the time in my professional career with people say, well, I'm not going to give them any religion, let the kids grow up and be 19, 20. They can pick whatever they want. And then I tell them that the kid is going to give you a God question, whether you want it or not. Because again, demographics explains 2/3 of everything. And if you look at life expectancy today, when I left Tampa, I had 520 hours with the hospice there, my last career in Tampa. And we had a saying in hospice, from the guppy to the puppy to the grandparent. Because people live longer, a child's first exposure to death today is more likely to be with a pet than with a person. And one day the kid's going to come home with no religion saying, what happened to the dog? And now the parents are faced with a God question. This is what we call in the trade a God question. So yeah, I'll let them grow up and they can pick what they want. And all of a sudden, where's the dog? And that is a God question. Actually, one of the early books by Rabbi Harold Kushner, before When Bad Things Happen, there's a great book on my shelf called When Children Ask About God, which sort of tackles that. So intermarriage is intergenerational, it keeps going on, it becomes chronic. Intermarried Jews who are currently raising minor children under 18 are much less likely to report they are bringing up their children as Jewish by religion than Jewish parents who have a Jewish spouse. If you're married Jewish to Jewish and you have children, there's a 93% chance you're going to say, I'm bringing up them Jewish. If you're Jewish as a respondent and you say, I'm married and my partner's spouse is not Jewish, only 28% chance that you say you're bringing them up as Jewish. And that's pretty eye-opening in terms of how you're going to grow your congregation. This is what you have to deal with. Remarried Jews reported they are raising their children as partly Jewish by religion. I'm not really quite sure what that means, because there are some core elements, especially this time of year, that theologically are contradictory, the Christmas tree and the menorah. How does intermarriage affect religion and child rearing? I call it the door question. I named it that. Regardless of in-married or intermarried, all Jews in the survey were asked, imagine a time in the future. This is the way Pew phrased it. where you have grandchildren of your own if you do not currently have any, how important is it for your grandchildren to be Jewish? It's a 60-40 split. It's, people willing to say it's important. It wasn't important for me for my children, but it's more important for me for my grandchildren. It is really, really interesting to notice that. And actually what I just had a Devar published for this weekend, where if you look at the Torah portion coming up this weekend, Jacob didn't do the best job of giving the blessing with Joseph because he was following the tradition of the firstborn gets something and the other one doesn't. And now you got family strife. Now he has the opportunity as a grandfather, Saba, to have Manasseh and Ephraim in front of him, who are Joseph's children, and he puts their hand on both of them and gives them the blessing. So the grandparenting gave him the opportunity to make up for the mistake he made as a parent. You'll see my Devar published this week. That's my opinion on that. And therefore, to this day, and the Friday night blessings at home, the blessing for the boys are maybe like Manasseh and Ephraim, not like one of them. So grandparenting gave them the opportunity to correct what they didn't do as well as a parent. Maybe that's what they're saying in this question. That, well, I didn't do it right with my kids, but if I have grandkids one day, maybe they should be Jewish. This is just the way they pulled the data. Again, this is straight from the Pew data, type of household affects what is important about being Jewish. Religion, ancestry, culture, religion, ancestry, and culture, multiple responses were allowed. And again, Orthodox, of course, religion, and conservative reform tends to be multiple choice. They take all three. Big difference there if the spouse is Jewish, spouse is not Jewish. Religion is not as important. Look at that break from 15% to 7%. So what is it really about? And part of that is Rabbi Weintraub, Philip Weintraub, who's now in St. Petersburg, used to be in Newburgh, said to me one day, and really nice, succinctly, if you take the 613 mitzvot, and there are too many, you can classify them A, B, and one of them could be those that have more to do with rituals, and one of those have more to do with ethics. And he said, he generalized, it was a nice theory from him. Orthodox are sometimes more concerned with the mitzvot having to do with rituals than morals and ethics, and the conservative reform are more concerned with Gemilut Chassidim. And so there's a nice, possibly comes out in the data here. How does intermarriage affect religion and child rearing? This table comes from Pew itself. Intermarried parents are much less likely to be raising the children as Jewish. I mentioned this before, just another way of looking at the data there. And it's the reality, but you can change things if you take into account in your marketing and programs. What is meaningful and fulfilling to American Jews? This is from that Pew study. Percentage of US Jews by religion who say blank provides them with a great deal of meaning and fulfillment. Spending time with family and friends, a great deal of meaning, fulfillment, Jews by religion. Family and friends, and this is probably more important than we realize. I'm glad it came out that high. I have a saying at the hospital that those of us who wear a badge, is my mantra, we don't get immunity from what we treat. The nurses and doctors treat pneumonia, they get pneumonia. We treat estrangement all day long. We're not immune from it. And there's always us and our patients who say, yeah, I got a son, but he hasn't spoken to me in 10 years. I got a daughter, it's been 15 years. And spending time with family and friends are so important. Why spend $30 a month and you learn from ancestry whose relatives you were 200 years ago and you make a narrative about them when you have your own family doesn't talk to you right now? And just try to make that connection. I mean, you look at what we call in statistics, non-directive behavior, which is observing rather than asking people, and ask funeral directors without the pandemic, how many folding chairs they're putting out compared to 10 years ago and 20 years ago. And I think that we got this family disconnect, and yet it's very important. And maybe shuls and how the house of worship can help with that, knowing that that's really a strong foundation, spending time with family and friends. What is meaningful and fulfilling to American Jews who reflect that they're Jewish by religion? held or attended a Seder last year. And that's a very high 74%. But if you look at Seder is generally in the home, is generally the more diverse prayer book of any holy day I know of. There are more variations of Haggadot than any other one. As long as you say we got out from slavery to freedom, there's some on based on Alcoholics Anonymous, some on liberation. Some go all the way to page 100, some go to page 8, and then we eat. And yet they have that feeling that they went to a Seder. So I think that has some meaning of some sort, because you don't want to criticize how well you conducted it. It was a way to get the family together, and it was a Seder. Because you see, I've seen more Haggadot, and I've seen more people that make it to page 10 to page 20, but it's a way to get the family together. And life's milestone rituals. And it could be a bar mitzvah, it could be a yahrzeit candle, comes up that high. And you can create more rituals, you can designate rituals. Rituals are very, very important. And you don't have to rely only on rituals that were there a long, long time ago. I created one that is owned by the Reform movement that just wasn't there one time. And I'm just, is back there in my past. But in 1992, I have no problem disclosing it. My first wife died, and a good rabbi friend sat down with me doing what I would have done as a chaplain. I said, "What's particularly difficult for you?" I said, Ron, I knew the words in Hebrew and English, what to say and when to say to put the wedding ring on. I don't know when and what to say to take the wedding ring off. And he said, that's what rituals are for. We don't have one. Why don't you write one? So I wrote something. He sent it into Reform headquarters. I signed the release. It's been helping people. So you can create, there's always room for another ritual. And a couple of rabbinic students have called me about it. Said, "Did you write that?" I said, "You know where it was." Except about 3, 4, 5 years ago, a woman called me who was a freelance writer for Hadassah magazine, said, "You don't know me, but," and she said she's writing an article about that. I said, "Oh, nice." So it goes out and helps people. Knowing that Yom Kippur is a day that has deprivation in it and you felt it somehow, and after that, look at that drop down to 27%. So it's really the top 3 that are big hooks to get people. Seder, milestone ritual, could be a bar mitzvah, that I also had a Jubilee bar mitzvah, a yahrzeit candle. Yeah, really give meaning for that, and try to find other things like that. Turning I may be doing something new at the hospital and finding people who were born at the hospital to all take turns turning a bulb at the menorah outside. Create a new ritual. Key demographics, the American Jewish population. This is critical because one of my mantras, when I put on my statistician hat, it was developed by Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player. When he was asked about his success, he says, "I don't skate to the puck, I skate to where the puck is going to be." And demographics explains 2/3 of everything. And Pew did, this is straight out of the Pew study. You got to see what the demographics are. The average number of children born per adult is 1.5 in the Jewish community, but it's 1.4 in the non-Orthodox, which is what we're talking about, Reform and Conservative. It's very high in those who identify as Orthodox. So you have a delayed age of first childbirth. This is a common way the Census Bureau looks at things, is what is the age at which the woman has the first child? And in the non-Orthodox community, it's now 28.6. In the Orthodox community, 23.6. The probability of having 2 children, 3 children keeps going down, which is why in the non-Orthodox community, there's 1.4 children per household. This is where the future is going to be. We have a lower rate than other parts of the population. So the average household size is low. And the education, Baruch Hashem, goes up, and that might delay the propensity to have children. This is before pandemic may have influenced childbirth. But the non-Orthodox community has 1.4 children per household, per adult. Was not per household, per adult. Among women, this is very interesting, from the big Pew study. Percentage who have had no children in the net Jewish versus US adults, of which 2.5% are the Jewish population, so it's dominated by the non-Jewish population. Look at that break. in terms of they've never had any children. And some of going to a study that Pew released very recently of the entire US population, of which Jews about 3%, the growing share of childless adults in the US don't expect to ever have children. And this came out since the Pew Jewish study just came out a few weeks ago. Percentage of non-parents for 18 to 49 who say they are blank to have children someday, plus 7 percentage points, from 37% to 44%, not too likely. They just don't want to have children. No subjective comment on that. This is a very recent study from Pew. People saying they're not as likely to have children. No, that's the way it's at. Also, I know objectively, one of the things that hurts me in our society from what I do is the geographic distance between hospitals that can accept pediatrics overnight is getting larger, and the distance that can accept pediatric behavioral health is getting even larger. So it could be partly deterrent on that. Do you keep kosher? Well, they asked it as a straight out question from Pew. Fewer than 1 in 5, 17% said they keep kosher in their home, however they defined it. 14% were going to say they keep kosher by separating meat and dairy. 3% say they avoid the whole thing by being vegan or vegetarian. Of course, a tremendous block. 95% of the Orthodox respondents said they kept kosher at home, 24% of the conservative, and 5% of the Reform. Respondents reported having a connection between Judaism but not classified as Jewish in this report, which I don't really, this is their data. I'm still trying to get my handle around it. Were you raised Jewish aside from religion, Jewish background, which if either of your parents were Jewish? This is interesting on that. It wasn't, if you have a split parenting, is not a 50-50 shot. There's a higher probability, slightly, of the father being Jewish. So the Jewish father married the non-Jewish mother, as compared to an even shot that the husband or the wife was Jewish and the other one was not Jewish. 42% to 32% is probably significant. That's slightly more likely that the husband would marry the non-Jewish wife. That's like the lower fertility rate in the American non-Orthodox Jewish community and intermarriage will continue to challenge the growth and affiliation involvement. This is my own comment. Increasing the focus on spirituality and connections with other members are key to growing congregations. Then religious education observance. This is what I'm taking out of this. And it's a lot of stuff, but I think somebody said they were recording this. You folks can have my slides. This is just a nice way of getting 250 pages down to an hour. A lot of stuff to digest. The questions may or may not be in the data, but I'm glad to try to answer it. And thank you, folks.
I have a question that was presented to me in the chat. Is there any data about whether a congregation's secular social action posture or community service initiatives are motivators to get or keep younger non-Orthodox Jews engaged with a synagogue?
No, I didn't see any questions asked that way in the survey. No, I didn't see that in the data at all that they asked that. But
So what are your feelings about that? Do you think that the more community service, tikkun olam, that's offered through a synagogue will keep the younger children, the younger kids or the teenagers more involved?
Yeah, I also think that we have to change the probability that we'll go to each other's houses. There's interest, with all due respect, when we were in the Clearwater area, that same street had a Reformed temple, a Catholic church, and a Protestant church of some sort nearby, and we'd rotate every year the interfaith Thanksgiving service. And with sadness, the Jewish community was not as likely to go into the churches as the Christians were to come into the shul. And that's not the only place I've seen it. I don't want to be critical about them, but we got to feel more willing to take the risk and be accepted and going into programs in churches as they are to come into synagogues altogether. You know, I've worked at several Catholic-rooted hospitals as a chaplain where there's been a cross in every room, and there's been a policy manual from the Archdiocese on how to take the cross down if any patient was upset by it. And even in the most Orthodox communities I've served, nobody's ever asked to take down the cross. So there's hope that we can, you know, be together. Over in Hemlock Farms, Pennsylvania, where our shul is, there's a wonderful church there, and we do programs in each other's place, not as much, but I think we have a degree of comfort. You gotta feel comfortable. There were two nuns. There's a great church in Catholic church in Safety Harbor, Florida, where Ponce de Leon went after St. Augustine, went around and stopped there. And two nuns came to the shul one night, and they said, "We didn't know we could worship in your sanctuary." I go, "Sister Paula, we read the same book that says, 'My house shall be a house of worship for all peoples.' We do our job, you feel welcome. You do your job, we feel welcome." And it starts within ourselves also, which is this thing that hurts me myself in terms of what I call silo Judaism, that the Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox got to feel comfortable in going to each other's house of worship and Chabad, and then we need to go into churches and they need to come to us. But we got this total misperception. If you Reform what's going on in the Chabad is misperception of what's going on in Reform, and we're all responsible for each other. So no, they didn't ask any of those questions, but that's my own feeling is, yeah, we got to do things together.
Does anybody else have
within? Yeah.
Anybody else have a question? You can unmute or put it in the chat. A lot of information there to process, Barry.
Yeah, it's you know, it's 1 hour versus reading 250 pages. I appreciate that everybody hung in there with us. It's a lot of stuff but a lot of it is eye-opening. Like, you know, you thought this maybe, and it's quality research, and yeah, it is true. It is true, and you have a lot more unaffiliated than you have affiliated. Maybe that's one of the reasons that all three of our professional groups of NACC, NHAC, APC, well, we have more chaplains in hospitals, and because people don't have their own clergy. I mean, you know, one of the questions we're allowed to ask patients all the time if you belong to house of worship, does your clergy know you're in the hospital? Can I call your clergy for you? And over again, doesn't matter the faith they registered. No, I don't belong anywhere. No, surely you got a priest that can come down and do this. Surely you have a rabbi can come down. No, you didn't invest, you didn't belong, and now you don't feel that well. And no, we didn't have anybody available. It's a long-term investment, you know, to make it an ethic that is part of your life, that you have to belong to something. That we're there for you and you're there for us at these times. You know, yeah, especially if you have your side or a minion. We have a quorum requirement in this faith, so that's what it mandates connectedness.
Is your synagogue holding in-person services?
I like to say our primary show is, even though we live in Middletown, we go to the Jewish Fellowship in Hemlock Farms, Pennsylvania, and we're back to doing in person again with major COVID guidelines. We may go back to this. It's an interesting show because this illustrates part of what's going on here. Hemlock Farms, Pennsylvania, an hour from us, is a gated community of about 3,000 homes. Therefore, the Homeowners Association allows one house of worship per faith community. So there's a church and a synagogue there, and the church serves the whole Protestant community. The Archdiocese has a Catholic church inside the main community, but not in the gated subdivision. And the shul on Friday night uses a Reform Siddur, and Saturday morning uses a Conservative Siddur. The rabbi was trained Orthodox as a chazan. He went back and became a rabbi. I am officiating services Friday night on Zoom, and then Saturday morning I'm sharing it with some other people to be in the shul. So we are back as much as we can. During the heat of the pandemic, when there was warm weather, we did parking lot services. We did outside where we could. We have one doctor member of the shul who goes around with a tape measure, knows all the CDC guidelines. And we spent a lot of time on Zoom the shul that we left, the conservative shul we left in Tampa, Makor Shalom, both the rabbi and the chazan, who are husband and wife, the chazan runs the shul, they both have had breakthrough infections. And they're trying to get back into the shul. The rabbi is a very low profile there. He's the chaplain and rabbi at Menorah Manor, which is an assisted living facility in St. Petersburg, that shares the block with the shul that Phil Weintraub went to. So I introduced them both to each other. So the chazan runs the shul, and they are still on Zoom because the clergy have had breakthrough infections. So it's wild everywhere. Every day in the hospital, you check the number of COVID patients.
This study was done pre-pandemic. It would be interesting to see how the pandemic affected some of these numbers. I know that I've been to services via Zoom more regularly than I would have been going into the synagogue, only because it's much more convenient. And of course, these types of programs have been great for us because you can log in from anywhere. But I wonder if anybody that wants a taste of Judaism is more apt to come to a Zoom event rather than walk into a synagogue.
Yeah, I think we will come out of all this, Bezrat Hashem, we will come out one day with hybrid models. I mean, particularly with the aging of the population, like this time of year, it gets dark real early. Why not have adult ed on Zoom and have certain services in the shul? You don't have to have A or B, you can have a mixture. I mean, because especially if there's a decent amount of driving to get to the shul and it's getting dark out. And, so I guess do something at night, do adult ed on Zoom and do in person where you can. You figure out some sort of a harmony on it. I mean, we used to laugh that if you deal with the time zone difference, one of the early pioneers in live streaming their shul services is the West End Synagogue in London. And we used to daven with them on Friday afternoon about 2:00, which was Shabbat for them. And then we went to London and said, we know all you people. So it's a nice way of getting introduced to it. The shul in Tampa, typical Friday night, well, somebody from Chicago, somebody from New York, somebody from Tampa, Clearwater. So that's one advantages of Zooming like that. You can get people from elsewhere around, particularly if they have second homes or something. So I think using the medium to its advantage, there is something special about being in a sacred space. It's one of the great theological questions. The Kotzker Rebbe was the one who came up with the theory that we adapted into a children's song. Where does God live? Where does God live? Wherever we let God in. It comes from the Kotzker Rebbe. So why is a shul more sacred than Zoom if we let God in? But there's something about making an ordinary place an extraordinary place. That's where the word comes from. And there's something about being inside the sanctuary that that you feel in your kishkas is different than being in front of your Zoom screen. And you got to communicate that it's in your kishkas that you walked in there. It's a special place.
Definitely.
So
Barry, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. So much information. And as Barry mentioned,
part of the community.
Yeah, thank you. As Barry mentioned, we are recording this, and Sharon will work her magic, and I suspect have it up on our website in the next day or two. So if you want to review it or share it with anyone else at your synagogue, your board, your clergy, whomever, feel free to go to our website to do that. And just a reminder, Sharon put something in the chat. Speaking of Zoom events and upcoming lectures, this coming Sunday, we have our Levine speaker series, and we have Rabbi Margie Sella coming to do a presentation for us. And Rabbi Sella is very interesting and actually from the neighborhood. She was an interim rabbi at Agudas Israel in Newburgh, and she's a convert, and a very interesting story. So if you have not registered yet, please go to our website to do that. Sharon put the information in the chat. And Sharon, anything else?
Nope, that's it. Just stay tuned for more Zoom events coming up.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, neighbors. Thank you for hanging in with me.
Thank you, Barry.
Yeah, that was great, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
So much information. I think I'm going to have to watch the recording again too, just because.
Yeah, so honest, I mean, you know, their presentation alone was long. But you know, I knocked down 250 pages, so it's not bad for an hour.
Yeah, no, very good, very good.
This is what I think we needed to know. I didn't, you know, everybody had a different agenda with it, and my main agenda was just to save you the time of reading it.
Yes, and we appreciate that.
Okay, signing off.
All right, good
Take care,
night. Thank
bye-bye.
you.